Thank you, Shepard. Well, legal schmiegel with the swipe of a pen. Is the president set to keep millions of illegals here? Well, the president's not saying. So what does this guy know that we don't?
I once said that it would be approximately 5 million, given what I heard. Let me just say, tomorrow, the next day, and all of this week, we're getting ready.
Ready for what? Democratic Congressman Luis Gutierrez is here, and your world is on. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and just call it amnesty on steroids. Reports that the president is poised to issue the executive order to end all executive orders and unilaterally grant millions of illegals amnesty. It could happen in days. The congressman will be here in minutes. To Arizona Republican David Schweikert, who says, do not even think about it. But he must know something, Congressman. What do you think of this?
Oh, look, in some ways, this is almost borders on crazy talk. But we've heard some tells from the administration that they fully intend to move forward on 4 to 5 million, some type of executive amnesty, which is a completely made-up concept.
All right. Now, we could talk about whether the president can even do this by executive order, but 4 to 5 million, do you know, or do any of your folks know, how they could even come up with that number, because it would represent, you know, a third to half of the illegals, at least we count, is here?
Well, our fear is they're going to try to create some sort of bizarre matrix that goes beyond the DACA, which is the deferred action, what was referred to as the DREAM Act, and say, well, if you've been in the country for a certain period of time or have done certain things, then you're going to fall into this new special amnesty category. But think of the unintended consequences. We see what happened to our borders when we did the deferred action on the DREAM Act. Could you imagine what's going to come screaming at our borders, from all around the world, if there's a perception that the president has just created amnesty?
All right. Now, what if he does this in a two-tiered fashion, Congressman? By that, I mean, again, this is assuming that there's something to what Congressman Gutierrez is saying. He's close to the president, so I suspect he must be onto something. But that the president's going to do this with a provision to entice Republicans, that is more reinforcement at the border, something like that.
Well, there's my misunderstanding of trying to get my head around what's this president talking about. We passed a piece of legislation before we went on the August recess, and it's sitting in the Senate, and it has border enforcement. It has money to deal with the unaccompanied minors. It has these mechanics there. And that piece of legislation hasn't moved forward. So where does the president get the resources, other than just sort of creating some sort of make-believe amnesty? And my terror is the cascade effect that's going to have at our borders and all across the country. Part of me believes that this will be the end of the Democrats' senatorial ambitions, because I can't imagine the public standing for such a thing.
Do you think that such an action on the president's part, by way of executive order, is an impeachable offense?
Great question. You'd have to dissect the legislation, how it's designed. Did they try to find some weasel language in the current immigration law to try to thread a needle? But from just a protection of the country, it's a pretty outrageous thing to even discuss.
Do you think he's tempting Republicans or trying to push this back in the base to get that kind of talk going?
Neil, there you may have hit what's really going on. Is this a little bit of presidential game of playing rope-a-dope? Because we know this White House, it's about politics, not policy. It's politics all the time. Is this some way of trying to, shall we say, separate some of the different populations going into the 2014 general election? Is he trying to excite his base? And if he is, this is sort of a bizarre way to go about doing it.
Congressman Schweikert, thank you, sir, very, very much.
Thank you, Neil.
Well, the Justice Department is ruling that a victim of domestic violence in Guatemala can now seek asylum in the U.S. and that the victim's children would also be eligible. The immigration rights groups are calling it a major victory. Stephen Camarada not so sure. He is with the Center for Immigration Studies. Now, your concern, Stephen, is that this could then be used as a convenient excuse for everybody to argue being here, right?
Right. Well, look, asylum was supposed to be for people who faced persecution because of their race and religion, generally from the government. This is completely different. This is a general social chaos. A particular society, in this case Guatemala, doesn't take domestic violence serious enough to go after the abuser, so the woman gets asylum in the United States. That's a complete distortion of asylum. And remember, as you suggested, it's entirely based on hearsay. It doesn't really require much
well, who's
proof.
saying it? It's the woman who's saying it, right?
Right, right. So is the abuser allowed, or the alleged abuser allowed to come in and refute it? No. Remember, all she has to do is say, I was abused and I can't get away from my husband if I stay in Guatemala, therefore let me stay here. And that's enough evidence if she seems credible. Because remember, there doesn't require direct evidence because it's not there. It's just hearsay.
And we should also add that it also, as you indicated, expands the definition of asylum to even personal matters at home. That go beyond just whether the government is targeting you, et cetera, right?
Exactly. I mean, this thing potentially affects tens or hundreds of millions of women in the world would now have immigration rights to come and apply for asylum because they have difficult family circumstances and they live in a society that doesn't take domestic violence as seriously as we do. It's a gross distortion of what immigration judges are supposed to do, and it's potentially going to encourage a lot more people to come in illegally and then apply for this.
Stephen, while I have you here, I want to get on a point I was mentioning with the Republican congressman from Arizona, and that is this move the president might make unilaterally, the executive order, to delay the deportations and keep here millions of illegals. What do you make of that?
Yeah, no, it does seem that he's going to do something, and it probably will hurt them a lot in the Senate campaigns, but he's committed to it. And yeah, you're right. There's the question here, is this even constitutional? Probably not. And it's going to be up to the voters to slap his hands and rein him in. He's basically saying he's not going to enforce the law on people, and he's going to go in the next step and give them work authorization and Social Security numbers and everything and identity papers.
Stephen, is there something, you know the laws on this matter far better than I ever will, but is there some wiggle room, as the congressman was just pointing out, that might in fact allow the president to do this? And that's why he was reluctant, that is Congressman Schweikert, to say it's an impeachable action. What do you think?
Yeah, no. I mean, there's no ability to him to do something sweeping like this. Some very narrow, targeted things. Prosecutorial discretion is the idea. Look, we don't have enough resources to get everyone, so we're going to focus on certain people. That's different than this. He's announcing in advance. He's devoting resources to do it. He's giving work authorization, so he's conferring a benefit. On each count, it seems fundamentally unconstitutional and contrary to the law. But it does seem that he's going to try to do it anyway. All
right. We'll get some details of this with Congressman Gutierrez of Illinois, who seems to be onto something here. In the meantime, I want to thank you very much, Stephen. All right, well, come on down. California Governor Jerry Brown says all immigrants, legal or illegal, are welcome in his state, no matter the price, that it is the moral thing to do. What does former California Governor Gray Davis think about that? He's our special guest, 8 p.m. on Fox Business. And if this American was fighting for ISIS over there, you ever wonder how many are fighting for ISIS over here?